So we're just gonna have a 45-minute conversation about random things, but mainly about themes I think we both share. We were having lunch and talking about the Belgian situation, and people are always, from abroad, are always amazed at how this can actually work, or also how separate Flemish-speaking and French-speaking people are. So we thought we're not going to solve this problem now, the problem of Belgium. But so you were also telling me about the Swedish and in Finland, so where, as we, Flemish, I'm Flemish, I'm sure there are French-speaking people here. So I had to learn French in school. The opposite goes for the French, they have to learn Dutch or Flemish. And in Finland, the second language is Swedish in schools. Where does that come from?
We are actually this year celebrating Finland's centennial, so the independent Finland is 100 years old. Before that, Finland was under Russian rule or under Swedish rule. So in that way, we've had different rulers, not any other rulers though. But the language of education before that in Finland was Swedish. So the intelligentsia and the university people and noblemen, they were all Swedish speakers. And Sweden was, of course, sending to Finland also lots of their own local governments and authorities and officials of all sorts. But because the language of education was Swedish, so when the idea of becoming independent became more interesting, and during the national revival, the Swedish-speaking intelligentsia of Finnish people, so there were Finns but spoke Swedish, they started to think that how are we going to be a nation if we don't have a literature of our own, written in our own language? And that's how it started also. That was the starting point for our printed literature. But at the time, so that was a little bit over 100 years ago, or 150 years ago, when they started to solve the problem. And the problem was that even though there were a lot of Finnish speakers in Finland, there were not actually authors writing in Finnish, because it was not the language of education. But that was anyway the starting point for Finnish literature. But the Swedish language continued to stay as the second official language. So officially Finland is bilingual, but the Swedish-speaking minority is about 6% of the population. So over 90% of the population of 5.5 million people are Finnish speakers. So that means that I have learned at school. We have to learn Swedish.
And is it then still considered like the generation of my parents? They would have people in Antwerp, so totally in the Flemish part, where people would be speaking French as a sign of being bourgeois and educated. Is that also?
Well, yes, in that way that there's still a lot of controversy and conflicts as well. Also because Swedish speakers are considered like better off. They are also better educated. Perhaps also just because they happen to perhaps value the education more, but also there's a lot of old money because, you know, the old noble families, they were Swedish speakers. So in that way, and well, you know, the richest, when you see the list of the richest people in Finland, then quite many of the names are Swedish names. So in that way, that's already one thing that is kind of putting the wedge between the two languages. And of course the Swedish speakers have to learn Finnish as well. But as I said, that most of the people anyway are Finnish speakers, and to others outside Finland, it always comes as a surprise that we have this bilingual situation. But then again, in my other home country, Estonia, there's also language issues because of Russia and because of the recent past.
Something you have often written about, or
Yes.
it's also main.
Yes, so Estonia regained independence in 1991, and before that there was a long period of Soviet occupation, before that a short period of German occupation, and before that another Soviet occupation. So of course during the Soviet years, the Russia was the official language. And the language was also used as a tool of politics and also as a tool of Russification as well. So already, you know, keeping up the Estonian culture in Estonian language became also one way of making resistance, passive resistance as well, because Estonian families are very much Estonian speakers. So in that way, it's not, even though the official language was Russia, then nobody was in Estonian families, nobody was speaking it at home, for example.
So you think that actually imposing a language as a authoritarian system on a country, that is one of the most powerful tools to dominate them, or to...
Yeah, it is. And it was also kind of shocking ways to start the rule in a way that in Estonia, of course, when the occupation started, nobody started to teach Russian language to people. I mean, certainly you just had to survive through the bureaucracy in Russian, even though you didn't speak Russian. So for example,
so how did that work? How could Estonians then all of a sudden speak
you
Russian?
have to learn. Then you have to learn. And for example, Russian speakers, of course, there was a lot of Russian speakers coming to Estonia. I mean, the population doubled in just a few years. So that was part of the Stalin's transplantation politics, one way of erasing the resistance as well. So a lot of sales personnel were Russian speakers, and if Estonian went to the shop, then they said back to you in Russian that speak the language of the people. So, so in that way, they were not interested in learning Estonian language, and well, it created all kind of situations. But for example, when my Estonian family is living on the coast, on a very Estonian-speaking area, and to get there, when I was a child, it meant a lot of paperwork. It was a kind of all year round thing to keep on, you know, trying to sort it out. Officially, it happened in a way that a close relative, that is the parents or the sisters and brothers, made the official invitation or applied to be able to make the invitation. And if the invitation was accepted, then we could apply for a visa. And if the visa was accepted, then we could travel. Sometimes invitations were not accepted, sometimes visas were not accepted, but if everything was accepted, then we could go. But the only person who could make the invitation, which had to be made in Russian, was my aunt, because my grandparents, even though they were alive, then in a way they couldn't have made the paperwork quite simply, or to try to speak with the Russian-speaking officials, for example, to sort it out. So in that way, she was the aunt who went to the school already during the Soviet period, was the only one who was able to make the official paperwork.
Because this is a very personal history too, much attached to your own life. Is that one of the main drives for this to be such a big theme? Because it's actually a story of minorities, and it's in not all of your novels, but in most of them, it's really a big fascination, and you've done a lot of research too, because not so much was officially known or kept in documents.
Oh yes, I could say that I learned the Finnish history at school, but the Estonian history I learned from the oral tradition that is, you know, passed on to one generation to another, because, well, in Finland, of course, at the time, Estonia's history or Estonia as such was part of the Soviet Union. And therefore, in Finnish school system, it was about Soviet Union. And in Estonia, of course, the history was the Soviet history, which had nothing to do actually with independency and things like that. So in a way, it was propaganda quite simply, like it always is in occupied territories, or when the ruler is totalitarian state, like Russian Empire or Soviet Empire was. But that also created, Estonian culture is very much about euphemisms. Or at the time, people used a lot of euphemisms when we talked about what had actually happened. For example, Forest Brothers, the members of the resistance movements. Now we can say that the Forest Brothers, and we can say resistance, but in my childhood, they were called to those who went to the forest. Or those
much nicer.
It is, yeah. And also when talking about Siberian camps, concentration camps, we only talk about those who were taken.
But this language is really at the heart of that kind of occupation of Russia in Estonia, because do you think that is the most powerful thing? Because it's a completely different situation. But for instance, if I asked my grandparents or people in the Second World War, First World War, about occupations and how that would work, they would say, well, honestly, it was quite a disappointment, because as an outsider, you have this image like, wow, they were really constantly being occupied in daily life. But she said, you couldn't really see it. But I mean, if language is, how did that go? Could people really not talk, and were they punished, or?
Well, the thing with a system where there is no freedom of speech, then you learn the rules. You learn the rules because those who don't obey will be taken away. I mean, especially the mass deportations, one in 1941 and 1949, the other one was perhaps the biggest tragedy causing dramas to Estonia when we think about the recent history. I mean, it was something that every single family was touched by. And of course, that had the political purpose to break the backbone of the resistance. Most of the deported in the second wave were women and children. In the first wave, they were taking all the officials of Estonia, Estonian Republic, police forces, officers, intelligentsia, but the second wave was mostly only women and children and old people. For example, my uncle was deported when he was less than 10 as a kid, so this was something that every single family has a personal experience about, and that was something that Estonia was not expecting, because nothing like that had ever happened before. And it also happened in other Baltic states, in many other Eastern European countries. And think about what happens in a society where, the intelligentsia is taken away, all the officials are taken away, all those who have been kind of heroes of the society are taken away, all those who are somehow supporting resistance or opposition are taken away. So in that way, that was really efficient, have to say, but it also created the fear, quite simply, because it is something that can happen, and that's something that you can still see how it affected the society, and especially when you couldn't talk about it in public. That means that after regaining the independence, people really had to learn to talk about it. We had him talking about it, between four eyes, like Estonians say. This is the thing to talk about between four eyes. that is between, you know.
So, and do you consider it one of your tasks, or is it one of the reasons, apart from your personal history, that it's you think you give voice to an unheard story, or also because, yeah, not so surprising, but you have really strong female characters whom you want to give a voice, because you also said somewhere, yes, I want to, especially women, they were only, their bodies were used as a kind of propaganda almost, which I thought was very interesting.
Yes. Well, I mean, giving a voice sounds like a grand task, and but when I think about, for an author, it's much more interesting to try to tell about or try to write about something that is not like, you know, it's not finished. And there's a lot of new research coming out all the time. Estonian history researchers and non-fiction authors are very active.
And do you use their work then? Because I really don't like to do research if I write.
Well,
but maybe you outsource it. How does that work?
I try to, and I have to. I have to also, because when we talk about history, then you have to actually know what you're writing about. That's the thing. And quite often I'm asked if I write about the recent past because of Estonian recent part, but also I have been educated in Finland. I went to school in Finland, and Finland is a country where historical novel has a very strong tradition. Estonians, well, also because of the history, but historical novel as such doesn't have exactly the same popularity as in Finland. Finnish people love historical novels.
Because of
Russia, probably. I don't know if this is put it like this, but I mean, our first historical novel was written by Fredrika Runeberg, a female author, in Swedish, but it was the first historical novel about the Great Wrath, that is the years of Russification in Finland. For example, one of our most sold authors, Laila Hirvisaari, her books have been sold over 4 million in the country of 5.5 million people.
In the country itself?
Yes. And what does she write about?
Only blind people and pets don't have them, or?
Yeah. But I mean, what does she write about? She writes about Karelia. And the Karelia is the part of Finland we had to give after the war to Russia, to Soviet Union. So in that way, even though...
Is it nostalgia? Or?
No, it's not nostalgia. I wouldn't say that, because she started her career, now she's already a grand old lady, but she started during the years of Finlandization in Finland, when the official discourse about Soviet Union was very complicated.
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure, I was not familiar with this Finlandization, it actually...
Finlandization is a term reflecting actually to political situation in any country where a smaller state is officially independent, yet the activity and the ruling comes from the bigger neighbor, and in our case it was Soviet Union. So the Finlandization affected. Finlandization is actually has become kind of a hot topic again, because some outsiders, now I mean, for example, some outsider researchers or historians or politicians are offering that as a solution for Ukraine. But nobody's asking the opinions of Finns who have actually lived through the Finlandization, and not even those who were supporting Finlandization at the time, not even they are actually recommending it to Ukraine. Because it's, even though the Finlandization for Soviet Union was a one way of showing the outer world that Soviet Union is capable of living with a neighbor in friendly terms. So in that way, Finland was kind of showcase
Yeah, and was there no? So Finland went along with that. Was it? So they.
Well, many say that we didn't have an option.
What would be the?
Well, it's difficult to say because I mean over the years you also Finns started to learned self-censorship. So it was a kind of trick or treat. If Finland did something that Moscow didn't like, then there was a punishment. And if Finland was nicely, then our bilateral trade was going smoothly. So in that way, it was a very complicated situation, but it did affect the freedom of speech, the way newspapers were writing about, and especially it affected also our textbooks, because they had to be positive about Soviet Union, and actually they were very positive about China as well.
I heard also that the Finnish are very open and direct and resolute if you just in normal everyday speech, but that they have more problems writing down taboo subjects, or that there is a gap between the really oral tradition and the written.
Well, Finnish people are not very good at small talk, quite simply. If they say something, they mean it, quite simply.
They're not Americans.
Not Americans at all. But if you come friends with Finn, then it will be very, very honest. We don't say "I love yous" all the time, but we say "I love you" only when we really mean it. So that doesn't happen too many times in a lifetime. But in a way, this tradition of historical novel is something that has affected me very much, and that's also one way of dealing with the difficult issues. So even though we had this situation of Finlandization and the public discourse was difficult, especially when it comes to issues related to war. I mean, for example, Winter War. I mean, Soviet Union said that we had started the war. We hadn't, for example. And then huge piece of land had to be given to Soviet Union. That meant that over 500,000 Karelians, that is the Finns, they were Finnish, they fled to what was left of Finland. And this we had, so after the war we had over 500,000 people who had lost their homes. So that's where Laila Hirvisaari and her books about Karelia became important, and also some other, she was also fled from Karelia herself as a kid, so she was a war refugee herself. So there was in a way, even though we lost Karelia, that was also actually an area where our national epos was born. So in that way, it has a cultural meaning as well. So, but there were authors who actually kept the literary tradition, and in that way, Karelia was like a literary place.
And so also female authors, because we have this image of the North being more a forerunner when it comes to equal rights, feminism. I think we almost idealize it as a kind of where everything, we look up to the North, and that's where equality actually is taking place. Or what also struck me is that, for instance, in the Finnish language, you don't have a gender. It's he or she is the same.
Yes, and yes.
Do you think it is related, this reality? That
it's also in Estonia.
Okay,
same thing. Yes. Well, it creates some problems to me as an author when somebody wants to translate my books, and then they always are asking me, "Is it she or he?" And but that means that I can actually write a novel where I can erase the gender, and so it's actually up to the reader if you decide if it's she or he. But of course, when translating, then I'm a little bit reluctant to give answers to that kind of question, actually, that I have to decide certainly that if a doctor is a he or she, because then I have to start to think, okay, am I now giving, I mean, of course, if should I be, political and say that this is a female doctor now, or should I be more, thinking about the historical situation, starting to run statistics.
It is really up to the reader, or it is really not clear which gender is meant, or Because
yes,
I
yes.
really have a hard time
of
even
course,
imagining
if
how
you
that
say
works.
that, okay, this person is a woman, or if the name is female name and
Yeah,
or male name, then of course you know the gender. But it's not difficult to write without giving any tips about the gender. And I don't think a reader would actually even think about it.
yeah. Well, and actually, but this is maybe a big leap. But so just leaving it out in the open and in a kind of not denominated place. Whereas today we see that every minority wants to be given rights, wants to be acknowledged, which I personally think is important. But how would it work? Yeah, okay, this is going to be a complicated question, I think. But no, so if you say we just don't even know if it's a man or woman talking or as a character, is that not also a solution to this problem of giving, for instance, transgender people, bisexuals, gay people, everyone their name and their place and their toilet room and...
Yeah, that's that's one way of putting it. Well, for example, in my novel Stalin's Cows, I erased the genders of the persons who the main character is having an affair with. So in the Finnish version, you don't know. I mean, it's up to you if they are male or female. And I was actually, it was my first published novel, and I was actually surprised how nobody in Finland paid no attention to it at all. In a way, I was kind of expecting that somebody would pay attention to it, but nobody actually did.
Was that a disappointment?
I was a little bit, but in a way, of course, it was an experiment also to see that actually are they actually reading the book through their own expectations, or are they actually reading the text? So in that way, it's more about your own expectations. I know that in Sweden they are also trying to erase the gender from the, but I don't know if it works because in Swedish language they do have the two gender. But it has been considered should they be political in that way? I have to say that Sweden is in many ways ahead of the women's issues.
And is that something you are really also? I don't know if I can say an activist, but you do have strong opinions and you like to write about them or write pieces about them. But then I wonder, what is for you a decisive point if you decide this is going to be... I mean, it's not one point, but can you know this is the genre that my indignation or anger or whatever has to look for? For instance, I mean, if I see something, some injustice, and I really am upset or angry, then I know this is a short-term thing. This is going to be a column or a piece. But if for instance, or what I found really interesting, you have this, your big international success, Purge, a thriller, started out as a theater play.
Yes.
So how do you do this genre switching or hopping or?
The story creates the need for something. I had no idea that I'm going to write a novel out of it. It's a story happening in 1991, 1992, just after Estonia regained the independence. But I wanted to write about the sexual abuse as a war weapon. I had been reading lots of Croatian authors and other Balkan authors, including Slavenka Drakulic, for example, and I was somehow frustrated about the fact that we had rape concentration camps practically in the middle of Europe during my lifetime. I mean, we should be living in a modern world, and that sounds more like Stone Age. And of course also, I mean, it was not even considered legally as a war crime. And I was really frustrated about that, and I felt that I need to do something about it. And also, when I think about Estonia, then of course rape was used as a tool of war, like in all wars. So, but nobody had actually written about it. So I thought that this is actually something I want to write about. But when I was reading a lot of interviews by women who had been victims of sexual assault, and I noticed certain ways to react, and one of them that they started to avoid looking people in the eye. And that's when I had this idea that actually this is absolutely something that should be on stage. That this must be on stage. This must be because the trauma,
the physicality, or
yes, physicality, and also that it needs to be visible, and also that because it is something that people are not willing to share. So the experience and how it affected. So actually it had to be also presented in the collective art form, which is theater. So that's how it started. And so I had no idea that I'm going to write the novel out of it.
And then you did the novel.
Yes, I did.
So didn't that feel like twice the same? Or was
well,
it a
actually no, because there's so much less text in the play. I mean, play is more like a framework, and then the others are doing the, actors, stage designers, directors. They have their own. But I had so many, so much material I couldn't put in the play. So actually, I was just finishing the play that I decided that I'm gonna write a novel out of it, because I had so much stuff, and that was actually a relief, because then I didn't have to feel sorry for the things.
The material didn't go lost.
And actually the starting point of the novel was a monologue I had to left out from the play.
Oh, that's a good way of using all your material and your documents. So the historical novel is, could you say, your the one you resort to, but with so much happening nowadays, you think you will write something about, I don't know, because it was also said in the brochure we're going to talk about the refugee crisis or so, but I think that they made it half a year ago maybe. So much has happened in between. Do you see that as a problem, where you think I could write a novel about what's going on nowadays, or it's actually impossible because you need this distance and this?
Yes, I think writing a contemporary novel is very difficult, because I mean, when you have the history, then you have a lot of information about it. You know what has happened, but I mean, if you don't know the end of something, you don't. And actually, I don't think we know enough at the moment about what's happening today. About Trump and Russia relationships, for example, we don't know at the moment enough. But I'm sure that, in 100 years, researchers will find amazing things. I'm pretty sure about that. But I mean, that doesn't help us writing about.
But you have authors who start doing that, like Ellie Smith, who writes about Brexit right the moment after it happens. Do you ever see yourself doing that, writing something about?
Well, Norma, my latest novel, which is now out in French and Dutch as well.
Yes, and which is the reason for you being here?
And it was
a publication of Norma in French.
While I was writing it, I encountered this problem of contemporary novel, and I was writing it in 2013, and it's a sort of postmodern version of the fairy tale Rapunzel. It's also about fertility tourism, and also about hair trade, that is selling hair, which are problems or ethical, which sort of new forms of exploitation, having a lot of ethical problems. But anyway, I was writing about Ukrainian hair because Ukrainian hair is most sought after. It's most expensive, just like
Why?
Russian hair as well, because the texture is good and they are blonde enough. So you know the.
And how come? Because they're uh, healthy people, or?
Well, I mean the hair is fair enough because Ukrainians are rather fair. And the texture is just happens to be good. I mean, think about Yulia Tymoshenko. I mean, her plate crown is fake, but I mean, she does have a good hair as well. So, in that way, I mean, and Russians do have a great hair as well. So, in that way, it's no wonder that it's so expensive. But I mean, I was writing about Ukrainian hair, and then there was a revolution in Ukraine. Then the former president Yanukovych escaped. Then the war started, and I'm writing about Ukrainian hair. So in a way, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do with this? I mean,
You would have people starting to write about their own hair, like
yeah,
this tendency then to keep it close to home to yourself, or
close to home yourself. But in a way, I had a character who was selling Ukrainian hair, and I was like, because I mean, I cannot write about, selling Finnish hair because Finnish women don't need to sell their hair, quite simply.
Well, you would make some money, probably.
No, but I mean, I have fibers, so nobody's gonna buy fibers, quite simply.
Okay. Well, if they come
used
from
fibers,
you, probably they will.
perhaps someday. But for good cause, for good cause. But in a way, I had to make a decision what to do with it, and I decided to make sure that the story happens in 2013, that is before the revolution. And then I was thinking that, okay, perhaps this is actually one way of telling about the background of the revolution as well, because it's a country where everything was on sale because it's so corrupted. So in that way, and that's hair trade is related to corruption as well. So in that way, it actually started to make sense. But anyway, it was very difficult to make a decision about it. And of course, nobody. I mean, if you start to write about, hair, then you don't actually expect world politics to affect it, quite simply.
No. Because we're almost running out of time, and we have not talked about Donald Trump yet. And every conversation nowadays has to at least contain one Donald Trump. How do you see his presidency evolving? Or because now there is this actually some real news, I think, after all this rhetorical stuff about fake news and this and that, and now he lost, which are facts, and he cannot deny them. He lost his Trump Care case.
Well, he's part of the bigger backlash of women's rights. The fact that it's okay for him to talk about women the way he does, then it also, he gives, by doing so, mental support for all those who are not supporting women's rights. That's one problem. I mean, there are also other signs of the backlash. For example, in Russia, certainly domestic violence is okay again. Before you went to the jail and now you don't. So, you don't expect that actually when something is criminal, then certainly it's not criminal anymore. And in Poland, women had to march for their right for abortion. There are a lot of things like that happening. And he's supporting, the opposite side mentally.
And do you see that as a temporary backlash or some return to old conservative values? And or do you think this is just some temporary thing and most of the people now consider some rights more inalienable than, say, 2 generations ago, where, for instance, my mother thought, even if you're intelligent and educated as a woman and you have children, then actually you stay at home. And now this has changed, so we see this as a progress, but do you think that is something just a a gulf, something temporary that...
Well, I don't know about how temporary, but I mean, we can make some good out of it as well, because at least it has made more visible the problems this world has when it comes to equality. At the time when I published my first novel in Finland, which was 2003, I was studying women's studies, and I was interested in art history. And if you are interested in art history, you have to. There's always the moment when you ask, where are all the great female artists? So, but on the other hand, I had been brought up in a country where there have been. Now we have over 50% of the authors are women. We've always had women authors, visible women authors. So in that way, the literary tradition was okay. But anyway, at the time there was a kind of mutual understanding in a way that women's rights are kind of passé because we are already so equal enough. But year after year, the more news we get from outside world, then actually we see that equality is not not in good shape at all globally, quite simply. And I think this should be some sort of wake-up call as well, in a way. And I also Toni Morrison, I think it was, who said that if you are free, you have to help the others be free as well. And there can be, I can say a lot of bad things about Finland as well, but now I'm telling you one good thing is that when Trump cut off the reproduction support for many countries, then that was, of course, considered very bad thing to do. And actually Finland is the country who is giving the more money than the others who are trying to fill the gap compared to the population. And that is in a way interesting, especially because we do have a right wing as well. We do have also populistic politicians as well in Finland. Some of them more popular than the others, some of them very popular. And of course, Finland is a country where there are a lot of people also against refugees and any immigrants coming to Finland. And nobody, not even them, were actually opposing that we are supporting. We are trying to fill this gap. That tells something about, even though you think that, okay, those far or right-wing people are very far from my world, then Finland is a country where we do have, even, the totally opposite parties have a mutual understanding of something, and that is that every single woman and a person has a right to the reproduction education and for contraception.
Okay, so we could call that progress.
Yeah, it's a progress, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, then thank you so much. We will end with progress, and thanks a lot for this conversation. Thank you, all the people here.
Merci. Au revoir.